Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about the heightened pleading rules, the heightened standards of pleading a case against the government in federal courts. The courts have engineered and constructed a system of fraud known as the heightened pleading standards. Now, I want to quote from Ashcroft versus Iqbal, 556 United States Reports at page 662, and this particular court order. Is handed down by Judge Terrence Boyle out of the federal courts in Raleigh, North Carolina. For the first time, they even notarized his signature, and they went so far as to put a notary stamp on this one to make it look super duper official. Now, the reason that I'm talking about the heightened pleading standards, well, let's see here. I don't want to show everybody my address, but it's addressed to me, and well, United States District Court. The reason I'm talking about the heightened pleading standards is very simple. Your so-called constitutional rights have been taken away from you entirely. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, when an individual goes down to the federal courts and tries to secure their constitutional rights under the Bill of Rights or their human rights under international law, the court goes into this, well, you have to plead your case according to the heightened pleading rules. They've taken Federal Rule of Civil Procedure number 8, which were notice pleadings, where you gave notice in the most generalized terms to the defendant in a case, and they've created this heightened pleading standard, where essentially it's made completely impossible to even state a claim against the government. They've used the absolute immunity under the 11th Amendment to grant to the government absolute immunity from suit. In other words, you can't sue the government for constitutional rights violations unless you have maybe an extremely expensive bar association law firm that's representing you. Then maybe, you know, the federal judges will accept a case or two just to make it look good. But when the ordinary citizen files a lawsuit against the government for the destruction of a family's marina and for the theft of more than 600 acres of property that resulted as a direct and proximate cause, it was well, let me take that back. It was directly caused by the destruction of the family's business. When you try to sue the government for taking millions of dollars worth of property through what's known as reverse condemnation, or inverse condemnation, excuse me, where they destroy your property, making it unusable, and then refusing to pay you compensation. These are rather complex issues of how it is the government can rob you blind and then using the heightened pleading standards, which are judicially created. They're not in the Constitution. Hell, they're not even in the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. Notice pleadings are supposed to be the standard, but they've created this heightened standard of pleading when you sue the government. In other words, you have to lay out your entire case, name all the names of the perpetrators. You got to know all the details, and you have to plead all the specific details of a case before you've done any discovery. The heightened pleading standards require that you have a complete cause of action before you've even done any discovery. Or in my personal case, in this particular case right here, while the state of New York refuses to obey the open records laws of the state of New York, and they refuse to obey the open records laws of the United States, and keep secret all the records and the details of how they completely destroyed my parents' marina year after year after year after year, and then that 5th year they totally wiped it out, destroying my parents' business, causing them to lose everything they owned. Everything they'd worked for was destroyed and taken from them because of the operations of the mill pond, the water levels on Lake George. And I laid these facts out for the federal court. But this federal court right here, and this federal judge, Terrence W. Boyle, he just making up stories. He said, well, we screwed you, we stripped you for your rights, and we forced you to adhere to the heightened pleading standards that they make up as they go along. The heightened pleading standards were imposed to give the appearance of proper handling and equal protection and due process in my case. But what it really is a big red herring. It's a big excuse to strip away from people the constitutional rights that they really don't have. Before the courts of the incorporation, before the courts of the USA Incorporated, you don't have any rights. And there's an awful lot of people that know it all over this country. How the process and the system has been so bastardized, you don't have any rights. Not really. They've taken away a lot of your Second Amendment rights. They've taken away a lot of your Fourth Amendment rights, your Fifth Amendment rights, your rights under the Ninth and the 10th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment, the so-called equal rights and equal protection amendment, the 14th Amendment, stemming out of the Ku Klux Act of 1866 and the Ku Klux Act of 1871, right there where the big bankruptcy during Abraham Lincoln's administration, for the people who know what I'm talking about. The Ku Klux Act, the 14th Amendment, does not protect white people because you're not a member of a protected class. How about that? You didn't know that, did you? Do some research on being required to be a member of a protected class the next time you go trying to get some constitutional rights out of any federal or state government agency or court. What's been created in the United States is quite literally an extremely sophisticated, prevaricated system of serfdom. Your serfs, your sharecroppers, Well, basically you're slaves under the United States codes. The rule of law doesn't exist when it comes to your personal constitutional rights, because what they do is they engage in extreme sophistry. They engage in extreme sophistry, and they impose the heightened pleading standards on you, which those heightened pleading standards are something. And then, of course, they just make up whatever they want to make up, and they type it down on their pieces of paper. They type it down on their pieces of paper, and they get a notary. This is the first time I got a notary republic to attest to the signature of Terrence Boyle. Ain't that interesting how they use the notary? I've never seen a notarization of a court order. This is first for me. And I've seen a lot of them. They're just trying to make it look all official and, you know, like it's beyond doubt that what they decree by fiat is so. Well, I got an answer for Judge Terrence W. Boyle, and I filed 13 pages of the historical record and 13 pages of the facts that are witnessed by millions, including state district attorneys, county attorneys, state attorney generals. The United States Army Corps of Engineers is involved in this case on a huge scale. The Environmental Protection Agency is involved in this case on a huge scale. Let's see. The United States Geological Survey is witness. The Lake George Park Commission, Department of Environmental Conservation, State of New York. The legislature for the state of New York going back to the 1820s. I've got so many records and so many witnesses to the facts in this case. It's absolutely staggering. Now, to prove it to you, there's a couple of websites. I'm going to post the links below. But the Flusher Gates of Lake George, and the poisoning of Lake Champlain. The photographs, there's lots of photographs. They don't lie. The witnesses like Chris Killian, he's an attorney from over there in the state of Vermont. The witnesses from the Burlington Free Press. The witnesses from the Lake George Mirror and the Adirondacks Almanac and the Glens Falls Post-Star and the Glens Falls Messenger and the Albany Times-Union and the Troy Record. The witnesses that live all over Lake George and all over Lake Champlain. The history and the facts, Judge Terrence Boyle, that you tried to wipe away with your completely erroneous prevarication and sophistry of claiming that I didn't give the Empire State notice. I gave the Empire State plenty of notice, Judge Terrence W. Boyle, and your excuses in this order, are out of order. I've got more facts that you ignored and refused to even discuss. There are so many witnesses, Judge Boyle, it's mind-bending. But you decided to court strip me. You decided that I'm not supposed to have any constitutional rights, and you imposed that heightened pleading standard garbage. It's not in the Constitution. These heightened pleading standards are a judiciary-created weapon to turn the American people into a bunch of slaves. that have no rights. Court stripping people. Just like in the old days of the plantations in the colonies before the American Revolution. Just by decree and by fiat. Just like in the old days of the province of Carolina, before North and South Carolina were split into slavery states. Judge Terrence W. Boyle. You see, Judge Boyle, I understand slavery just fine. And I know that when we use hocus pocus and word games and the heightened pleading standards, this case right here is the epicenter, the epitome of the heightened pleading standards, and this nonsense, Judge Terrence W. Boyle, called absolute state sovereign immunity, which, by the way, the state of New York never claimed. The state of New York never claimed state sovereign immunity, Judge Boyle. You imposed it. And then, of course, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals rubber stamped your decision, and the United States Supreme Court, like they do in 99% of all cases, threw my case in the trash basket. Like 99% of all the other cases. Because they are a fraud, Judge Terrence W. Boyle. The U.S. Supreme Court is a fraud. And this decision, this whole case, this entire case, ignores truckloads of evidence, trainloads, shiploads of historical records, and millions of witnesses. Millions of witnesses that you, Judge Terrence Boyle, have decided that don't matter. You refused. You blocked. You absolutely destroyed my right to present evidence to fact finders. You absolutely eviscerated and stripped away from me my constitutional rights to a jury trial using the heightened pleading standards created by the courts. The heightened pleading standards, which, by the way, are something pretty darn new just in the last 15, 20 years. And they're a weapon. They're a weapon to bludgeon the American people, to strip them of any semblance of their human rights. In other words, the heightened pleading standards are nothing but a giant fraud that's being used by the police state empire known as the United States of America Incorporated. The bankrupt state, if there is such a thing, the bankrupted empire of the New World Order, which happens to be operating under, declarations of war and operating under declarations of national emergency. The United States is operating under a declaration of national emergency and has been so since the 1929 period, 1930. And all the money, all the fiat reserve notes, and all the other fiat BS, that's bullshit, Judge W. Terrence Boyle, under the heightened pleading rules. The other prevarications and sophistries and bullshit being used to court strip people for their constitutional rights. The very height, the very zenith, the pinnacle of court stripping people is in this case. The very pinnacle. John Ashcroft versus Ingball, 556 U.S. 662. The heightened pleading rules. Isn't this just convenient? You can reduce 320 million plus American citizens to serfs and slaves and sharecroppers on the plantation during the colonial days of slavery by imposing this heightened pleading standards, totally ignoring Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 8, plain and simple statement of generalized facts. That's all Rule 8 requires. But we've decided to eviscerate and murder Rule 8. You see, ladies and gentlemen, when you go to Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 8, it lays out the very basic and simple requirements of giving notice to government actors and government agencies and to federal courts and to the United States Supreme Court that this decision, this whole process in this case, the process in this whole case, Judge Terrence W. Boyle, this involves my parents, Clifford and Anita Witham, and the rape of my family for their 600 acres on Lake George, New York, because of that rotten old mill pond, the Flusher Works Dam, dam number 230, also known as Damned Dam A, that destroyed boathouses, destroyed docks, destroyed islands, destroyed shoreline. There's millions of witnesses, Judge Boyle. Millions of witnesses and just truckloads of state government and federal government records. The facts in this case, Judge Terrence W. Boyle, are copiously, abundantly available. But you wipe that all aside. You just push that all aside with the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which rubber stamped your decision. They did the same thing the United States Supreme Court did. They're getting jiggy with their secretaries, and they're out there on the golf course on their vacations and taking their junkets and just not dealing with, anything remotely resembling an actual review of a case. And then, of course, we've got the United States Supreme Court, which is just a supreme farce. The United States Supreme Court is a supreme fraud. 9 people, 9 lousy people, 9, dictate to over 320 million what they're going to get. The Mises Institute refers to them as America's own Pulitzer Bureau. That's the Mises Institute, Judge Terrence W. Boyle. The U.S. Supreme Court, 99% of all America's cases, they're thrown in the dumpster. They don't review them. They don't rule on them. They don't say peep. All they do is they wheel them out the back door at the Supreme Court and shred them and throw them in the trash can. They don't deal with them at all. So the United States Supreme Court, the 9 justices, the 9 dictators in their little black robes, they disregard the rights and the lives of more than 99% of the American people. So I guess that would make the United States Supreme Court the epicenter, the epitome, the very pinnacle of the 1%. They don't even deal with 1% of the cases, Judge Terrence W. Boyle, and we both know it. Last note here, folks. I got some kind of business I need to take care of for a few days. This particular case right here is extremely revealing of how this corrupt machine works. This is why Colin Kaepernick and so many other people are protesting in the United States. This is why Americans from all over America are not only taking a knee, but they're standing up. And they're refusing to give up their arms. An awful lot of the people that live in this United States Incorporated fiasco, and it is a fiasco, ladies and gentlemen. This right here is the most inadequate, inept, flawed set of rules you can think of. Because absolute state sovereign immunity exempts the states. The states aren't under this Constitution. They're exempt under state sovereign immunity and the 11th Amendment. Wake up, America. You have been totally punked by the judiciary and their judicially created heightened pleading standards. Folks, I'm going to leave it right there. But this fella here, Judson Witham, the son of Clifford and Anita Witham, I'm not going away, Judge Boyle. What's been done to the Witham family? What's been done to my mother and father is not going to stand. And just, in closing, Judge Boyle, the facts of the flusher gates of Lake George, the facts of the pinhole in the bathtub, the facts of the poisoning of Lake Champlain are not going away. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, hasta la vista, God bless, and you betcha, we're coming back.